Hello world, my name is Jacob Donn, and you are listening to Talk About It, a show that dives deep into substance abuse and addiction to uncover stories of hope and resilience. Today is July 31st, 2024, and we are going to talk about stigma. Not everyone has experienced it, not everyone knows what it is, but for those who do suffer from stigma, serious social, financial, and cultural challenges may exist. But what exactly is stigma? And how can we do our part to combat it? To answer those questions and more, I'm honored to have Jalyn Powell on the podcast today. Jalyn is the statewide coordinator of Stand Together, an anti-stigma organization, and we're going to talk all things stigma, mental health, and youth. How are you doing, Jalyn?
I'm blessed, can't complain. And yourself?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
So let's just dive right into this conversation. For our audience at home, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey in prevention from the beginning until now?
Sure. So my name is Jacob Powell. I'm the statewide coordinator for Stand Together, also the CEO of OUTLOUD. My journey in prevention actually started in 2016 after the death of my twin brother and best friend who were in a car accident coming from a party. Substance use was involved, alcohol specifically. And I think in that moment, I realized that as I was 19 at the time, I realized how normalized using substances were for, the party scene, young kids. But I didn't understand the major impacts that it could have on anyone, regardless of age. So my journey started then. I started education programs and community events to educate youth specifically about the impacts of misusing substances. And from there, I was a youth advocate for what then was called Delaware Core, and then transitioned to my position here as a youth lead and statewide coordinator for Stand Together, an anti-stigma program.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, I'm so glad to hear that you've been involved in such noble work. Of course, a big area of your career is with stigma, specifically with Stand Together, which we'll get into a little later. But for our audience at home, there may be some misconceptions about stigma, or they may not even know what exactly stigma is. So could you explain what exactly is stigma?
Yeah, at surface level, stigma is a negative attitude, perception, belief of something that can lead to social exclusion or discrimination. If you ask me personally, I'm a little deep. What stigma is, it's the barrier between struggle and solution is what I noted as. And to give a picture or analogy, let's say someone is at the brink of starvation. They're starving, but there is food in front of them. But society says if you eat this turkey sandwich, you're not cool. Or if you eat this turkey sandwich, you're weak. So people would rather starve themselves based on a negative perception of what society tells them than to get the very thing that can nourish their body or nourish them back to health. And that's the same thing when it comes to substance use or mental health and wellness, because there's such a negative perception or negative attitude around mental wellness or mental health support, or even treatment or support services and resources for someone who may be struggling with addiction. People would rather starve themselves from getting the help they need than to access resources that can nourish them back to health.
I'm curious, you mentioned these negative connotations and social views of perhaps treatment or getting help or stopping yourself from starving, if you will. Do you know the evolution of these social trends, how they have changed over the past few decades?
Yeah, so I will say slowly but surely, I do believe stigma is starting to decrease. And I say that because I feel like there has been an increase around conversations in the social media platform, whether you're looking at your Twitter, Instagrams, Facebooks. More people are talking about their personal journeys, their personal challenges with mental health and wellness and addiction. And you also see movies starting to show real life scenarios. So you're starting to see people struggling on the TV screens, and also seeing the normalization of seeking support and seeking resources. So I do think that, and I think I said this before, I'm a big Disney Pixar fan, especially Inside Out 2, adding on emotions like anxiety. You start to see your life on a screen, and it starts to show people that you're not alone, and what you're experiencing is not as isolated as you may feel. So as stigma was a big thing and still is a big thing, I do see small changes today.
I want to talk about stigma with specific things that some members of society may look down upon. Of course, you are very well versed in mental health, but how does stigma regarding mental health and its treatment differ from stigma perhaps with alcohol or drugs? What's the difference between them?
Yeah, I think one is visibility. I think with signs and symptoms when it comes to addiction with a substance, you can see those things, right? Oftentimes when it comes to mental health, they're not as visible as people may think. Depression, for example, is a silent killer, and depression can look different depending on the person experiencing the challenge. There's things like, and we can tap into, but there's things like high functioning depression, high functioning anxiety, which was basically, so when you talk about depression specifically, that's for sake of conversation, most people think someone is long periods of sadness, typically 2 weeks or more. They are changing behavior. They start to withdraw, isolation. But there's also high functioning depression where there is no changes in physical behavior. You're still showing up for work. You're still showing up for family. You're still able to perform in your daily duties, but you're suffering these internal battles that no one gets to see. So I think stigma when it comes to mental health and wellness is very different because what you're experiencing is not so visible to the eye, and it's not as frequent in conversation, so you don't know how to address some of these things. And a lot of people don't even know that they're experiencing a mental health challenge until they learn, what that challenge is, what symptoms and signs that challenge exudes. So
I see. And of course, there are many organizations out there that help to combat stigma. One of them is Stand Together, which you are the statewide coordinator of. Yeah. Could you explain what is Stand Together?
Yeah, so Stand Together is a statewide, what started out in Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. We just piloted in Delaware this past year, and it's an anti-stigma program that emphasizes youth-led a youth-led model and a peer-to-peer model. So essentially what happens is the schools would provide an adult advisor, and the advisor would work together with our Stand Together team, and we would train the students on how to identify signs and symptoms of someone that may be experiencing a mental health challenge or substance use challenge, and not diagnose. The goal is not to diagnose, but the goal is to learn to identify signs and symptoms and become a peer supporter. So learning how to support someone who may be going through a challenge. We emphasize finding trusted adults to build that relationship. We normalize the conversation around mental health and wellness, and normalizing seeking help, which has been a barrier as well. But it's essentially, we're training the youth to be youth advocates within their schools. At the end of the program, they do a community-wide or school-wide project where they're educating their peers on mental health and wellness and substance use as well.
That's so excellent to hear. I assume that there are many different models or platforms that anti-stigma organizations use. Why does Stand Together use the peer-to-peer kind of, I guess, classroom model, and what advantages does that offer?
Yeah, so oftentimes the first person that a peer is going to get any type of encouragement, support, vent session with is their peers. Like, it's the people that look like them, people that are in the same environments as them. So we try to encourage the peer-to-peer model so the students can get the support they need at that level. We do understand that there is a disconnect between youth finding trusted adults, and it's not that there isn't any, whether that be a whole separate stigma, but we understand that our first priority is to provide students with the tools necessary to be supporters or be friends of their environment first, because when you do that, that allows them to not only get help at their level, but it allows them to normalize the conversation with people that they're comfortable having a conversation with at the time. So.
I see. Yeah. Obviously, you are the statewide coordinator for Stand Together. I'm sure you worked with a lot of people both inside of Stand Together and outside. Is there a story or a person or an event that has especially impacted your life and that has given you the fuel you need to continue working in this field?
The story that impacts my life, or the fuel, I guess, that allows me to keep going is actually my own journey through mental health, right? As a person of color, Black woman specifically, there is a lot of stigma associated with seeking support and resources when it comes to mental health and wellness. We're taught to be strong. We're taught that showing emotions makes you weak. We're taught that not be voicing your opinion at times can be looked at as condescending, or you're too emotional. So it's a lot to unpack when it comes to being a person of color, specifically to my experience, a Black woman in this world. So a lot of the challenges that I face, I did face alone in the beginning. I suppressed a lot, so I didn't allow myself to feel the heavy grief or sadness, or loneliness. Even anxiety, right? We mask those with a lot of things. I just started picking up jobs. So I'm thinking where people are looking at me thinking she's just a workaholic. She's, doing X, Y, Z. Really, I'm masking, my anxiety. I'm trying to stay busy so I don't have to sit in depression. It wasn't until 2019 I got into a car accident and I was forced to sit at home for six months. It was like 4 to 6 months, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Went to therapy and realized that for years I had been living with high functioning depression and didn't know it. I was experiencing panic attacks and didn't know it. I didn't know how to articulate what I was feeling. I didn't know how to name, the things that I was going through. So through therapy, and counseling and much self-work, I was able to get the help I needed. But I recognized that I suffered for so long because, one, I didn't know what to look for. There was so much stigma around seeking support and seeking help, and I didn't want people coming behind me to have to wait that long or suffer that long before they got resources.
I see. In addition to your work and Stand Together, you
Mhm.
were also the CEO of OUTLOUD.
Yes.
Could you explain what is OUTLOUD?
Yeah, so OUTLOUD, as I love to say, is an empowerment service organization. And what we do is we provide tools and resources in the realms of mental health and wellness and social justice through education and advocacy. So a lot of, as it relates to mental health, a lot of the things we do is provide safe spaces for communities to normalize the conversation around mental health and wellness, to talk through their feelings, feel supported through community, and we address specific stigma. So stigma around mental health and wellness in Black and Brown communities, stigma between mental health and wellness and faith-based communities. So we're making sure that we are targeting areas where stigma is present and stigma is high, and we're starting to debunk those stereotypes to allow more people to feel free to talk about how they're feeling and seek professional help.
I'm wondering, what led you to found OUTLOUD, and how did you decide which communities are especially in need of anti-stigma education?
Not to be, I don't even like saying religious, but OUTLOUD was founded divinely. It was definitely something that was totally outside of my hands, but led to be in fruition through divine intervention. My own life experiences had led me to, I was being asked to come speak at platforms, speak at events. So OUTLOUD was actually originally a public speaking business. Then I got offered the position as a youth lead with the state for mental health advocacy, and I kind of adjusted my business to fit mental health and wellness at that time. And like I said, it was founded in 2019 as an LLC. I started operating the business 2020. January 1, 2020 is when I've got my position as a youth lead, as a mental health and wellness advocate. And through my experiences in life with stigma, mental health and wellness, that kind of is what drives the foundation of OUTLOUD.
I want to switch gears and focus on something you mentioned, which is youth.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a lot of work with youth, and I'll get into that in just a minute. But when it comes to youth specifically, I know that, of course, dangers and threats and risks have always existed to youth in the realm of substance abuse. But today, and in the past few years, I believe we have seen some very concerning trends and dangerous different facts and figures regarding substance abuse among youth. Do you have any details about these concerning trends among young people and teenagers?
A factor that I believe is contributing to these trends is lack of positive outlets lack of mentorship, and lack of spaces where students feel they have room to release what they're feeling, right? I think that when it comes to trends, especially, I mean, you see it younger and younger with the vapes. You have middle schools having to instill vape detectors in their bathrooms. You have elementary students, that are using substances, and it's getting younger and younger. And I do believe a lot of the students that resort to these things don't know where else to um, release. So when you're using a substance, more than likely you are trying to numb a feeling. You're trying to run away from something that you're going through, or get your mind off of something. So if they have more outlets and more spaces where they can release what they're feeling, they have more trusted adults or trusted peers that they can come to, and more tools on how to positively cope, I think you will start to meet that bridge in the middle.
So in order to actually implement these positive outlets, whether it's through trusted adults or through organizations, what needs to be done in order to actually bring these positive outlets to young people?
Yeah, I think the first thing is creating a safe space to even know what the young people are feeling. And when I say safe, I mean a non-judgmental space. I mean a space leading with compassion and curiosity. Because a lot of times students they feel like two things. They feel like, one, that no one is going to understand or relate to them. So it's no point in sharing how they feel, right? Or if they do share how they feel, they'll get dismissed or shut down. So then it's no point. The other is they genuinely don't know how to articulate what they're going through or what they're feeling. So I think when you start to pay, I think the first thing is start to pay more attention to the person versus the behavior. And when we start to train adults and peers on, that's why I think Stand Together is so important, on how to identify signs and symptoms. You start to take the focus off of the behavior. Okay, what is this behavior exhibiting? Where is this behavior stemming from? Is there something going on in the home? Is there something going on in the school environment that we need to address? Is this person experiencing depression or grief? And they just don't know how to articulate that. So I think having spaces where they can have the conversation of what's going on is the first step.
I see. We've talked a lot about youth and about your work, but we haven't really talked about what led you to this work. You personally describe yourself as a youth advocate who amplifies youth voices, and previously you served as you worked for the state government of Delaware as a youth lead for one of their departments. What led you to this focus on youth, and why do you continue to focus on young people?
Yeah, so young people are our leaders of tomorrow. Like, young people are going to be the ones that serve us 10 years from now, 20 years from now. They're going to be your neighbors 15 years from now. So young people are so important to me because they're pivotal to our future, right? There are organizations that service and focus on adults, and they do very well at it. Me personally, I focus on young people today because I do believe that young people often, I know what it's like. One, I'm not far off. I'm a millennial. I'm not that far off from them, but I know what it feels like to be in spaces where you feel like I'm so young. People don't see me. People don't hear me. And I don't want them to be the lost or the forgotten. So I'm so focused on young people because young people are at a pivotal age, especially when you're getting to that middle school, high school age, where this is the age we need to get them. We need to focus on them, and we need to provide the resources necessary, because whatever they experience, whatever knowledge they get at this age is going to fuel their adult lives. So they're going to fuel the people that we see in society. So that's why young people has been my focus today.
Right. Jalyn, you have given us so much knowledge, and your perspective on stigma, mental health, and youth is really invaluable. I'd like to ask one more question, though, that kind of ties in stigma specifically. We're seeing, even though certain social trends might be becoming more accepted of treatment and of different outlets and positivity, there still is a lot of work to be done. And this fight to combat stigma is definitely not over. So in your personal belief, what needs to be done to combat stigma, bring positive outlets to both youth and adults, and overall bring about a more healthier and stigma-free world?
Yeah, so stigma is like a rumor, it gets spread, right? And I feel like the first thing is changing the narrative, right, around mental health and wellness and substance use, seeking support services. I think changing the narrative and spreading the positive things about mental health and wellness and seeking support would be the start. Also, understanding that stigma within itself is, I think the more that we address, the more that we normalize the conversation, the more that people feel like they're not alone. And I think that's another big thing, is realizing that you're not the only one that has gone through this. You're not the only one going through this. The more people that can share their experience. So one thing about Stand Together, our peer coordinator and myself, one of the requirements is that we have lived experience. So we're able to resonate with the audience that we're talking to. And I think the more people that can start to be vulnerable and transparent, that will start to reduce some of that stigma as well. So having spaces, when it's talking about stigma specifically, having the spaces to normalize the conversation, changing the narrative, and I think spreading that word, that's where we can start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jalyn, thank you so much for all the insight and wisdom you've given us on stigma and mental health in youth today. For our audience at home, that is Jalyn Powell. She is the statewide coordinator of Stand Together, the anti-stigma organization. My name is Jacob Donn, and we'll see you next time on Talk About It.